Should the Minnesota Vikings trade for Dexter Lawrence? It's a question that people have been asking. And quite frankly, the Minnesota Vikings should really consider to try to trade for somebody that's a big name at the trade deadline. Why? The Vikings could have a Super Bowl team. And if you can help keep that Super Bowl team rolling, you're going to be in a great spot. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk a little bit more about the offensive line. And we're going to talk about adofo-mensah's really sly maneuvering when it comes to the roster. Strap in. It's going to be a great show. Welcome to the Real Forno Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Real Forno Show, hosted by the one and only Tyler Forness. A to Z Sports sought him out to be their Minnesota Vikings reporter and NFL analyst. And he's a proud contributor over at SKOL North's Purple Daily. Tyler is also the captivating host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Real Forno Show. I'm your host, Tyler Forness. With me, as always, with googly eyes, he is producer Dave. Welcome to the show. To everybody that's down in Florida, please stay safe. Please don't be like that Lieutenant Dan guy who's going to be in a 20-foot sailboat and just ride the wave. And I'm not making any of that up. He's literally planning on riding the wave. Be safe. Get to safety if you are in the path of the storm. And please, if stuff keeps happening, bail. Just bail the show and listen to us at another time. I know, I've got a couple buddies that are inland in Florida that they're going to be kind of in the path. They're not expecting anything till like 11. So just stay safe, and we're all pulling for you. In the meantime, welcome to the Real Forno Show. I am Tyler. He is Dave. And joining us tonight is Mr. Cheddar Boy. Hanging out, chewing on a brand new bone. And we are going to have some fun here tonight.
Yes, we are. And that I was hoping that was a bone and not something else. But
yeah, no. He's not one to chew on other things. He does like to carry shoes. He gets that from Odie, I think. But I did find one of my I don't know if it's necessarily nice, but I have a pair of black leather sandals that I got from American Eagle. They were $20. But they're nice, and they were all broken in, and they were still looked nice. You could wear them with nice pair of shorts and a nice shirt. Nope, chewed up. Son of a biscuit. I was a little annoyed by that, but that's okay. If that's the worst thing that's going to happen with these dogs, I think I'm doing all right.
Yep. Anthony, stay safe.
Yes, please. Glad you're in a. Hopefully that hotel is a safe place, but Orlando, I think, is inland enough where I think you're going to be safe. So we're going to keep those fingers crossed. So let's talk about trades. I wrote about Dalvin Tomlinson the other day, and yesterday, in fact. I don't think that trade is realistic. I don't think
you mean
the
Dexter
Giants. Who did I say?
Dalvin Tomlinson.
Oh, we're going to talk about him in a little bit. Yes. Different Giants defensive tackles, because remember, we signed Tomlinson away from the New York Giants.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote about Dexter Lawrence because a lot of people have been talking about it. I don't think it's a realistic trade possibility for a couple of reasons. One, he just signed a big extension. Two, Joe Shane and Brian Daboll are fighting for their jobs. And if they're fighting for their jobs, why would they trade their best player? Their best defensive asset. They just got Brian Burns to pair with him for the long haul. Two, it's going to cost a lot of money for the Giants to say no. I'm going to pull up the total amount because I'm genuinely not sure that this is the one piece of information I did not grab. Because I grabbed multiple other aspects. I grabbed the cap hits, because he's only a prorated $6 million cap hit right now. Prorated. Like that's not too bad. But if they were to trade him, as I get annoyed by how this is working. I love Over the Cap, but the ads, how they pop up is just really annoying. So they would incur it. They would save about a prorated version of $7.1 million. They would take on a dead cap hit this year of 7.41, and a dead cat hit next year of like 21. So sorry, yeah, it would be just over 21 million. Not exactly great business strategy when it comes to the New York Giants. But here's the caveat that I don't think has been mentioned yet. They signed Odell Beckham Jr. and dumped him right away. So it's not a 0% chance, but I'm putting it at a near 0% chance. But it's the idea of trading for Dexter Lawrence to me that I think is so intriguing. And one of the things about trading for Dexter Lawrence is you have to get creative. The Vikings only have 3 draft picks in 2025 that they can trade. It might be 4, Dave, because in all the research I've done, the Vikings did trade Jesse Davis at cutdown day in 2022 for a conditional 2025 7th. I have seen no confirmation if that is in a pick that the Vikings have, or if that condition wasn't met. I have not seen anything about what the condition was. So the Vikings might have that pick. And if they have that pick, that just gives them another piece to play with. 7th round pick is basically, hey, pick your UDFAs. That's what the Vikings did with Levi Drake Rodriguez and Michael Jurgens. You get to pick your UDFAs. There's benefit to that, absolutely. But it's something to be mindful of. So you have very limited draft capital. You have all your 2026 picks. But here's the thing about 2026 picks. Some general managers can be hesitant to take picks too far into the future because they may not get to make them. Because you still have to win games in order to keep your job. And that's where trading away the 2026 capital to a guy like Joe Shane, where he's on the hot seat now. Why would he accept picks that far in the future? Now, you could argue, and adofo-mensah has talked about this in press conferences, like you can't operate like you are going to lose your job. You can't make decisions like, oh, I may not get to make that pick. Well, is this the best move for your franchise? If the answer is yes, you make the move. If the answer is no, then you don't. And you can't be thinking like that, because if you're thinking like that, then you have a Rick Spielman 2021 where he goes rogue and you have 1 third-round pick out of 4 still left on the team after 1 season. Like, those are the kind of things that can happen to you. So the idea of trading for Lawrence, I think, is a really good one. The practicality of it is damn near zero. But I'll say this. If the Vikings were to make the move, Dave, here's what I would do. It would be Dexter Lawrence and a second for this year's first, next year's first, and next year's fourth. So you're giving up 2 firsts and a fourth to get Dexter Lawrence and a second. And here's how I came up with that kind of trade compensation. It's a similar style to the TJ Hawkinson move, which is what I think the Vikings would do if they were to make a move at the trade deadline. Acquire somebody that you can bring in and keep for a long time. Don't just make a trade as like a rental. Rentals sometimes don't work out. You know where rentals do work out? The trenches. Significantly easier to acquire somebody in the trenches or a kicker than anywhere else. Hard to get a quarterback, hard to get a wide receiver, running back, tight end, corner, safety. Get a guy in the trenches. Because at the end of the day, block this guy in front of you. Or, hey, get around this guy in front of you. Yeah, there are going to be nuances with like your pressure packages, the stunts, and how you pressure and drop. It's all going to be different from scheme to scheme. But the basis of how you play the game is going to be the same if you're on the Vikings, if you're on the Packers, if you're on the Chiefs, if you're on the 49ers. It's all going to be the same. Block him or beat him. So the trenches a lot of times are where you can see impact players be acquired and help you win a Super Bowl. And that's where the Dexter Lawrence conversation begins. Dexter Lawrence is the best defensive lineman in the game, not named Chris Jones. He already has 6 sacks, Dave, as a nose tackle. That's like Hall of Fame level kind of production. He is on pace, Dave, for 18 sacks this year. 18 sacks as a one tech.
That's crazy. He's that good.
Actually, he's played 5 games. He's got 6 sacks. Yeah, sorry, he's on pace for 19. Absolutely bonkers. I do want to ask, because we're having this conversation. Tycoon W says that that's a terrible package, what I would give up for Dexter Lawrence. I would like to hear why you think that. I'm going to explain why I came up with that number, that kind of compensation, and also why it doesn't really matter, because as much as we think we know nothing. And if Dave, you've been covering the Vikings for a long time. Sometimes trades come in. It's like, whoa, that guy got a lot in a trade. Or, whoa, that guy got nothing. It's like, what's going on? Like the Amari Cooper trade a few years ago. It was Amari Cooper in a 6th for like 2/5. Dave, he's like a Pro Bowl caliber receiver. And he went for nothing. Like sometimes trades don't necessarily matter. Like the trade value. Because value is such a cyclical thing. It's like the stock market. It's worth what somebody's willing to pay for it. And it's hard to really talk about players like tangible assets, but their playing ability is a tangible asset. And that is what you are acquiring. You're acquiring the person and who the player is. So if 10 teams are fighting to trade for one player, you're going to have a robust market and you're going to be able to probably get above market value. If you don't, if it's one team and you need to get rid of them, well, guess what? Your market's going to go kablooey. When Antonio Brown got traded to the Las Vegas Raiders, he went for a 3rd and a 5th. Antonio Brown, at that point, was the best receiver in the National Football League. Antonio Brown, in the decade of the 2010s, is the best receiver of the decade. You could argue Antonio Brown is a top 5 receiver of all time. What he was able to do and how he won was incredible. It wasn't quite Jerry Rice level, but his technical precision, his ability to manipulate space and get defenders to do what he wanted with leverage was just incredible. He was so good. We will remember him for the off the field stuff. We will remember him for creating the Twitter account CTESPN. But good Lord, was he good on the football field. But he became such an issue in the locker room, and he only wanted to go to the Raiders that it forced their hand, and they had to accept a much smaller package than what they should have been able to get for him because he was that talented and that good. And then he threw a fit about being able to wear a helmet, and he lost out on $19+ million in the 2019 season. That's why when we talk about trade compensation, as much as we think we know, it's so hard to actually know. But I will tell you how I kind of came up with my best guess. Because you can use historical precedent, and you want to use historical precedent with stuff like this, because history will give you a baseline of how teams are going to start, like, kind of view these players. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to come to fruition that way. Because, like I said, there are many outside factors. How many teams are interested, how motivated the team is to get rid of a player. All of these things matter. So I looked at historical precedent, and there's not a lot of great defensive tackles that get traded. There just aren't. The only recent example, so I only went back 5 years because it's hard to go back too much farther than that, Dave, and consider it like a modernized like trade compensation, just because there's so many things that can change over a 5-year period. The amount of analytical data that is now accessible to us, the amount that we're learning about how the game can be quantified, how we can value players, positions, and production. It all changes. And we
the
think
amount of trades alone has changed over the last few years.
Absolutely. We think of analytical data as Pro Football Focus. We are friendly with Pro Football Focus. I think that they offer a lot of great things, but they aren't the be all end all of analytics. Analytics, by definition, is a collection of data to understand something. It doesn't have to just be Pro Football Focus. I love using sports info solutions as well. There are other people that have created their own metrics and use data in a way to kind of quantify it and help tell the story of the game of football. There's so many different things. And PFF is great, but that's not all analytics. Rick Spielman told a story about analytics where they had a system designed to understand the personality of a player to help them find wide receivers. And that's how they found Stephon Diggs. So these things do end up mattering. One thing I'll say here, as we kind of break this down, going back only 5 years, there was one trade with defensive tackles that mattered. Because a lot of it was like, hey, I'm going to send you a 7th or 6th round pick for this guy, or we'll do a late round pick swap. Those aren't compensation. Those aren't ones that we can tangibly use to talk about what this trade might be. Okay. The only one that was in 2020. The 49ers traded DeForest Buckner to the Indianapolis Colts for the 13th overall pick. Now, this does matter, the fact that it was the 13th overall pick, because that puts a tangible value, not a variable, on what that pick is. So if the Vikings were to trade 2 first-round picks, they do not know when those picks will be. The team acquiring them does not know what picks those will be. You could get lucky, like the Seattle Seahawks when they traded Russell Wilson, and they got the 5th overall pick and they landed Devin Witherspoon. You could be the Detroit Lions where they got the 6th overall pick, and they ended up trading that, and that's how they got Jahmyr Gibbs. These things all factor in. So,
or you could be unlucky and get the 32nd pick.
Yep. That is a factor too, and teams have to weigh that risk, because if you get the 5th pick, that's a lot of value, but if you get the 32nd pick, it's not so much value, and you have to be able to weigh, okay, if we get the 32nd pick, is this still worth it to us? And you have to be able to answer that question with a yes in order to be able to accept a trade. So I went and looked back at some edge rusher moves over the last 5 years, and one stood out to me that I think is an interesting comp. Bradley Chubb went from the Denver Broncos to the Miami Dolphins at the trade deadline in 2022. A 1st, a 4th, and Chase Edmonds, a reserve running back. I think that's probably going to be your best comparison point. But because nobody trades defensive tackles, because when you have a good one, you just keep them, it makes it a little harder to judge what that trade compensation would be. So I kind of extrapolate, okay, I think 2 first-round picks is the starting point for a discussion. I don't think it's the be-all, end-all where it's just flat 2 first-round picks, end of story. It could be. I think the Vikings will try and get creative because they'll want a little bit of value back, which is why I'm like, okay, you send the 2 first-round picks, you get a 2nd this year, which is how the TJ Hawkinson trade factors in. Because remember, the Vikings sent 2 picks, but they got picks back in those same drafts. So they only lost the value of the pick swap. They did not lose picks. They kept the same quantity of picks. And I think that's very important here. They kept the quantity of picks. So the Vikings will keep one of their picks this year, but they will trade 2 picks in the next draft, which is the 1st round pick and the 4th round pick. Would the Giants accept that? Probably not. But I think having conversations with people, I think that's a fair ask. I think that's a fair price, but it could be more, could be less. Because if you go back to the 2018 season, Dave, remember when Khalil Mack got traded? It was one of those weird trades where it was 2 firsts, but then you did a pick swap where the Bears got a 2nd for a 3rd round pick and a 5th for a 6th round pick. So the Bears got excess value back from the Raiders, and the Raiders still did get 2 first-round picks. So I think that's an interesting idea. And I think that's something that the Vikings could do. I personally think the Vikings could do something like, hey, you trade us this player, we'll give you a first if you give us back your second. I think it was the A.J. Brown trade during the 2022 draft was A.J. Brown for a first and a third, or first and a fourth. Hollywood Brown got traded with a third-round pick for a first-round pick. I think that's the style of move that I think the Vikings would try to accomplish because of the limited draft capital that they have next year. And I think that could be a benefit to help this team now. I don't think they would acquire a full-blown rental for a high price, but I do think that they would do it if they could lock up a guy long-term on the defensive line or be cornerback. And we're going to talk about a couple guys here in a minute because that is the mantra of QB Adofo-Mensah. He wants to get people in the building and keep them in the building. He did that with TJ Hawkinson. When we looked at it initially, he was like, TJ Hawkinson, we're trading for a tight end, really? But then we thought about it. And the more we thought about it, the more it made sense. And the more the idea was, hey, this guy's going to be able to ball out with these choice routes, and he's going to be a long-term fixture on this football team. And it's proven to be that way. And now once he comes back from that torn ACL that he suffered, ironically enough, if he comes back against the Lions, Dave, his return will be in the same building against the same team that he tore his ACL. You don't often see that. Very interesting. But I do think that style of trade, the TJ Hawkinson style, where you're doing pick swaps and you're getting a guy who can be a good asset for you now and long term, I think that is the move that Kwesi would end up making if he does end up making a trade by the trade deadline, which is 4 weeks out.
I gotcha. I just think as much as I'd love to have Dexter Lawrence on our team, I don't think it's going to happen. I think there's 2 players on the Giants that the Giants are going to keep and build around. Malik Neighbors, who they drafted this year, and Dexter Lawrence, who is the best nose tackle or close to it, all-pro, not just Pro Bowl, but all-pro nose tackle, young, just a stud. They're not going to get rid of him. Now, if they were willing to, I'd more than, I think 2 firsts and your compensation would be a very fair value. And I think it'd be great. Now, there's a question Edwin asked about what does B-Flow want? What would he like? Could he envision using Dexter Lawrence?
Why not? So here's been my philosophy with how the Vikings have ended up building this team. I believe that they passed on defensive line last year because they believed that they could, with what was available to them, strengthen heavily the edge room, the linebacker room, and the corner room. And it's unfortunate because we didn't get to see the cornerback room come to the fruition of the plan because the plan heavily involved Kyrie Jackson, and he tragically passed away in that car accident. His size and length was something that was very intriguing because he had the athleticism to match. I mean, even though he was 25 years old, he was a late breakout for stuff that's completely outside of the realm of football and legality. He kind of struggled like just with himself and ended up working at a grocery store. You guys all know the story. And then he went to junior college, Alabama, Oregon. But the guy was primed to be a good football player. And the idea of getting guys like that in this defense is how they wanted to build it. Well, then that happened. Mekhi Blackmon tore his ACL, and now we are where we are. So I think they just punted, so to speak, on the defensive line because of what was available to them elsewhere. And they're like, okay, we're going to fix all these other things. And because we fix all those other things, we can mitigate the defensive line for now. And then we're going to look at bringing in a lot of defensive line next offseason. And I think that's a really smart way to go about it, Dave. Fix what you can. Don't force everything because you can't do everything all at once. And because of what they brought in the edge rusher department, you have Pat Jones and Jihad Ward and Jonathan Grenard who can stand up and put their hand in the dirt inside on pass rush downs. So you are able to mitigate some of those losses with the defensive line because you have a great edge room. I think that matters too. So do they prioritize edge and cornerback? I really don't know how they prioritize defensive tackle and cornerback. I don't know how they prioritize either of them. I have a theory that with corner, they believe it is more of a collective group than they want to invest into one singular player. Like if they had access to a Sauce Gardner or a Pat Surtain, I'm sure they'd pay him. But do they want
Reed?
DJ Reed's not quite on that level. I mean, he looked like it on Sunday, but he's not. Do you want to find a guy that you're going to end up paying $20, $25 million to? Or would you rather have a bunch of solid options who, playing within the context of the scheme, are going to be able to help elevate the defense? I think that is the conversation we need to have about how the cornerback room looks, Dave, because I genuinely don't know that answer. I think it's an interesting paradigm that the Vikings have kind of presented with how they built the cornerback room. Now, they did have to pivot. They signed Fabian Moreau. They signed Stephon Gilmore after both Jackson passed away and Mekhi Blackman tore his ACL. They were not going to sign those guys, theoretically, until those events happened. And they felt like, oh my gosh, we have to bring in other people. We have to bring in stopgaps because of what happened. Blackman and Jackson, theoretically, were going to play big roles over the next 3 years. And Blackman still might because he's going to come back from his torn ACL next training camp, should be 100% by training camp, and then we'll be ready to go. But I think the idea of how this team has prioritized those two positions so far, I think there's doubt that they really believe, especially within this scheme, that they are inherently more valuable than others. Because it just doesn't feel like with how this defense is structured that they are that valuable. And I will give the caveat. It could be that Brian Flores is just scheming around not having that because he doesn't. And that doesn't necessarily mean that he does not want to have them. So I'm going to be really intrigued, and I'm going to be paying real close attention this offseason to how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah tries to build out this roster, especially with the immense salary cap space he's projected to have. Very, very intrigued there, Dave. I'm very intrigued.
I am too. It's a question of, we're talking about who could push us over the top, and Dexter Lawrence is that frosting on the cake on the defense that would make that defense, it's already number one, would just solidify it even more. You talked about corners. Corner would be nice, but we've got that. How it's working is working. Now, the guys are older, and are they going to hold up all season? We don't know. We'll find out. There's what folks have been talking about. The two weak spots on the offensive line are center and right guard. Now, I wonder, without looking, because I'd have to look, is there anybody available, or could be, that falls into that? They're in the third year-ish, fourth year, just started a second contract that is decent, that would be willing to make the move for? Because Ed Ingram has regressed this season.
I'm going to be honest. I don't think he has.
Well, I don't think he's improved, put it that way. Okay. Now, with that could we get better? Could an improved center help Ed Ingram? Could we get better in those two spots? Because those are the two worst spots on the offensive line. To help with who we have playing quarterback, Sam Darnold this year and J.J. McCarthy next year, stay alive. Now, people are worried about Sam getting hurt. we haven't given up a ton of sacks. We're not there. We get up a lot of pressures, but not sacks. So, and then we're playing deep developing pass plays, which tends to give more pressures, more opportunities. But I'm just wondering if there's somebody out there, because I saw this week that, you know who the number one guard in the league is right now?
Couldn't tell you.
Ezra Cleveland is the number one PFF ranked guard in the NFL, all of the NFL.
Interesting, because that Jaguars offensive line has been booty.
And he's the only good one. At least grading wise. And take that with a grain of salt this year.
Yeah, absolutely take it with a grain of salt. I think their grading's been it's been bad.
But I do believe if we can improve interior line, center and right guard, whether it be by them improving, that's fine. Or if we have to go outside, that's a possible look. But I'm not sure it's going to do that. People talking about bringing on Dalton Risner. One, I don't know if he's coming back. We haven't heard. He hasn't been activated. And two, I don't know if it's going to be much of an improvement. And people will say, well, he can pass block better. Well, part of the reason we're playing better on offense is we have a running game now. And part of the running game is the run blocking. And that's something that Ed and Bradbury have done well. That's
very well.
Risner's weak spot. So it's just, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of what could push us over the top. Would Dexter Lawrence push us into the Super Bowl? Maybe. Would he be great to have? Oh, absolutely. For the same reason the Giants want to keep him. He's a building block. Is he worth 2 firsts? Yes, he is, because he's already proven himself. But, and people say, well, you don't want to give up the draft pick. Well, you're basically using that draft pick, like with Hawkinson. You're spending it. You're just spending it early, and then the other one's the cost for getting somebody that's already proven themselves to be one of the best in the league. So, I don't know. Will Hernandez, anyone? Patrick? I remember when he was drafted, and everybody was so high on Will Hernandez, and we should have taken him, and then he didn't do squat. I don't know if he's turned that corner or if he's ruined and still doesn't do squat. So, but.
Yeah. So here's my take on Dalton Risner. The Vikings don't believe he's a starter. They told you that this offseason when they signed him to a deal that was easily cuttable. And then he got 0 first-team reps over the course of the first 2 weeks of camp before he got hurt. 0. They just told you straight up by their actions that they don't believe he's a starter. Because they said, oh, yeah, he's going to work in. Well, if he was really going to work in, they would have worked him in. They would have believed that he could actually compete for those jobs. That was lip service. And the actions always speak louder than words. 2, Risner is so bad at run blocking that I really don't think any deficiencies that Ed Ingram has in pass blocking is going to take him off the field. I think that some of the PFF grades and how they've been charting pressures has been really, really poor this year. Like worse than prior years. And I think some of that can honestly be pointed to the loss of some of their high-end talent. Just in the last couple of years, Mike Renner, Austin Gale, Steve Palazzolo, Sam Munson, all gone. Like, that's a lot of high-end talent. Oh, and we didn't even mention friend of the program, Eric Eager, who's now working for the Carolina Panthers. He was their lead data guy. He was the guy that was implementing all these systems. Like, to me, that's the thing. And Norsefius makes a wonderful point. Nobody else gave a crap about signing Dalton Risner. Nobody. Like, I think my basic thinking with the Dalton Risner thing is people thought Ed Ingram was really bad. And I think some of that still stems from his rookie year when they let him work through failure. And I think there was a lot of merit to why they did that. It doesn't help him to struggle and then get taken out. Let him struggle and help him fix it. And I think that manifested with some real improvement in 2023. I think this year has been he got his butt whipped by Dexter Lawrence. And this last game, I'm sorry, I watched every single pass rep. I did not count 5 pressures allowed by Ingram. I did not. And look, there you could make a real argument that, hey, maybe I'm a little biased toward Ingram. I'm biased towards trying to be right. Like, I don't put my feelings into things. I like, okay, what do I see? What do I think this is? And I think Ed Ingram's a solid guard. And one of the big things is he's a dominant run blocker. He will bury you into the ground. The way the Vikings run duo, they're killing the opposing teams. They're destroying them. Like, we see like Ed Ingram miss a stunt. That's bad. It's been a problem for 3 years. 3 years. I don't know how that gets fixed. And we talked about that on Monday, Dave. I recommend you go listen to that show. But there's so much more to playing offensive line than just stunts. And one of the pressures he allowed, Dave, he slipped because of the poor and wet surface, and he did the splits. Like, that's the thing. And Aaron makes a good comment in the chat. Good linemen are hard to come by. I think he'll be okay. Even if you don't like Ingram, you're not finding better. In October, in week 6, you're not going to find better. They're not out there. If they're out there, why haven't they been signed? Like, that's part of the conversation. You're not going to find better than Bradbury and Ingram. The Vikings have determined that those guys are good enough to help this team be successful. And quite frankly, I think they're right. This team is 5-0. And part of the issue with the offensive line is they're being asked to block for 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds. Norsefius has also made a good point. Darnold has had more time to throw. It feels that way. The time to throw stat is so hard to parse out, whether it's, hey, they've actually had more time to throw or they're holding onto the ball longer. There's so many different ways that you can take that I kind of don't use it very much. To me, the offensive line has played better than we've seen an offensive line for the Minnesota Vikings play since, Steve Hutchinson was on the team. Like, that's how good this offensive line is playing. They're one of the better units in the league. Analysts across the NFL sphere are saying that this offensive line is really good. So, the PFF numbers, here's the thing. I challenge you all to ignore the PFF numbers for offensive line. I think they do a great job on an overall aggregate. I don't think they do a great job with offensive line play. I don't. So, NFL Plus, watch the film. And that's why I watch the film every week and I come and talk about it, because I think it's really important. I'm going to try and do a couple film pieces tomorrow. We'll see how good the dogs are for me, because it's still a pain in the butt to keep them separate. But Cheddar is sleeping. He's a good boy. He had shots today, so it's been a rough day for him. Lastly, Dave, before we go, I want to talk about 2 things. One, I want to talk about different players that were kind of recommended to me by fans. If you want to go on Twitter, I tweeted out this tweet yesterday. I said, the Vikings can make a move at the trade deadline. Who would you like to see them trade for? And I'm going to end up writing about some of these tomorrow, maybe tonight. So I kind of took the ones that I thought made the most sense. So give me 1 second. I'm going to...
You look that up, and I was listening to Locked On Minnesota, and Ron Johnson was talking about Ed Ingram and how Ed Ingram was getting bad grades from PFF, and he's wondering if, because he doesn't believe PFF's grading properly, just the same as they did with Patrick Peterson, that they're knowing exactly what the assignment is. And he gave an example where the offensive line call was a fan to the right, and the players went to the right, and then Ed seemed to get beat on a stunt, that stunt actually may not have been Ed Ingram's responsibility. But PFF saw it and said, yep, but we're marking him down. He's going to do...
Dave, hold on. You remember when we talked about that during the preseason when they charged David Questenberry with that? When that wasn't Questenberry's responsibility? And he never actually engaged with them. You see, that's what I mean when we have these conversations about PFF. I think they're great in a lot of areas, but I don't think they do great with offensive line play.
Right. And he's going to... Ron Johnson says he's got a couple of the coaches he's got lined up. One of them is going to be Chris Cooper. He's going to ask him about that specifically when some of those plays, when they see Ed apparently get beat so easily, is it because of play call or is it because of Ed? And he thinks it's most likely play call, and that Bradbury may have screwed up or the running back may have screwed up.
Yeah. I think those are all interesting elements.
Jason says Alex Boone has always said O-line grades have been screwed up from PFF. It is. They don't know. They're eyeballing it. Now, over a career, yeah, they're pretty close. The aggregate, over a large sample size, they're pretty close, but they're not exact.
Yeah. And that's when you have an NFL offensive lineman saying, hey, this isn't working, red flag number one. All right. So I want to talk about two things really quick. We spent a lot of time talking about the offensive line. I think that's a big deal. But I think we also have to talk about some potential candidates. I'm going to give this caveat. There's so many teams that we don't know if they're going to be buyers or sellers because they're 2-3 or 3-2. We have to kind of look at situations and try to guess. And we really have no freaking clue who's going to be available and who's not. So these are all guesses. These are all players that might. Okay. Dexter Lawrence, we talked about. Jets cornerback DJ Reed. That team's in win now mode. But if they lose 2 or 3 more games in a row, do they try to trade Reed, who's a free agent after the year? Prorated $10.5 million contract. He was excellent. He was as good as Sauce Gardner on Sunday. I don't think he's as good as Sauce Gardner on a game in, game out basis, but he was on Sunday, and he's very good. He allows them to play a lot of man coverage, which allows you to do a lot of things if you can man up one-on-one. And it allows you to play like a lot of interesting things, especially when you have a guy like Justin Jefferson. Dalvin Tomlinson from the Cleveland Browns. If the Browns decide to sell off a couple of pieces, Tomlinson is a prorated vet minimum contract with a $3 million. His option bonus has already been paid. $3 million over the next 2 years with $2.025 million option bonuses. So option bonuses, for those of you that don't know what those are, you can pay them out whenever you want, and they're structured like a signing bonus. So they prorate over 5 years. So you can add void years in there, and you can spread out that cap hit while giving them the cash now. That's the benefit of an option bonus. That's how Jalen Hurts' contract is structured. One of the players that was very popular to me, given to me, was Travis Etienne of the Jaguars. I don't think they're trading him. They are 1-4, but they've been really close, and I think they believe Etienne's a part of their long-term future. Prorated $2.418 million this year and $6.143 next year. Titans defensive tackle Jeffrey Simmons. I don't think the Titans are going to move him, but if they do, $16.5 million prorated salary this year, $20.173, $23 million, and $17.5 million over the next 3 seasons. His teammate, Sebastian Joseph Day, that's a guy that could get moved. 1.375 prorated salary with $425,000 in per game roster bonuses. So if he's on the active roster, he gets the prorated amount of $425,000. And then Carolina cornerback J.C. Horn. If the Panthers decide to actually blow it up, you never know with David Tepper what he's going to do. He's a hothead. Vet minimum prorated this year, 12.472 with the 5th-year option next year. If you want to really bring in a great corner, that's the move. There are going to be a lot more options that we'll end up talking about, but those are the ones that I kind of identified right now as, hey, maybe these guys, but it's too early to really have super in-depth conversations because we don't know. We don't know so much about the teams that they're going to be willing to sell. We don't know so much about the teams that are potentially willing to deal with the Vikings, because I'm eliminating the Bears from that conversation. I don't think the Bears will want to deal with us when it comes to players. The Packers certainly won't. The Lions are different. The Lions are like that. They're like what's the old adage, Dave? Like it's not politically correct anymore, but like the redheaded stepchild, like the outcast. They're like, of the Vikings rivals, they're kind of the outcasted one because they've been so bad for so long.
Well,
like,
they've been the abused child in the corner.
It feels different trading with the Lions versus trading with like the Bears or the Packers. It's different. So I don't think that the Bears or Packers would trade for players. Now, they've traded picks with us in the draft, but I also think that's a little different. So Dennis makes a good point in the chat. PFF doesn't know the schemes that they're trying to run. They think they know. That is a great point. And being those of us who watch film, we think we know too. And we'll tell you, this is what we think it is. But oftentimes we don't know. And we're told that, hey, this is not what we're trying to do. This is not what we're doing. And then sometimes it's more of an attack, which I completely understand. The players are being miscategorized. Sometimes it's a really friendly conversation. And I love having those. I would love to get a couple players on this offseason and just talk ball and talk like different things about responsibilities and like how things work, because I think that's really interesting. And that's something that we can do that maybe other people can't, because we are willing to have those conversations. There's so many nuances, and I think I paid less attention to PFF grades and like some of those stats now than I ever have. Like Aiden Hutchinson has 40 pressures. No, he doesn't. I'm sorry. He is not having that good of a season. I think he's might be one of the more overrated players in football, but that's just me. Last thing, and then I got to get off. We got to watch Survivor tonight, which I don't know if I've told you this, Dave. One of my coworkers is actually on Survivor.
Okay.
Yeah. If you guys have been watching, I think it's either Gala or Gata, the Yellow Tribe. Sam is one of my coworkers. He writes for A to Z Sports. Pretty cool. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. I think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is front runner for Executive of the Year. What he did with the free agency, being able to maneuver and bring in the right players, bring in the right fits for this organization and what they want to do offensively and defensively, especially defensively, because 6 guys that were brought in this year are starting. I think that would be really, he's been really, really good for this team, but it's some of the little things that he's doing. And last week, they cut Myles Gaskin and signed Robert Tonyan from the practice squad. They put Gaskin on the practice squad. Yesterday, Dave, they reversed it. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, why? Why did they reverse it? Why? Like, that doesn't make sense. Here's why. You have Robert Tonyan, who had already had 2 elevations. Myles Gaskin had 1. That was in week 1 because of the whole non-guaranteed contract thing. So they flipped him. They elevated Gaskin from the practice squad, and then they moved Tonyan back to the practice squad to conserve his final elevation, because TJ Hawkinson, they are expecting back either against the Lions or the Rams. So now by doing that, you've saved that last elevation for Tonyan, and you burned another one with Gaskin, who you're planning on keeping on the active roster anyway. So they just did some shrewd maneuvering. Gaskin and Tonyan don't have their bottom lines impacted. They don't lose any money. They make the same amount. But it's just a procedural move that's so smart and sly that's going to help the Vikings for the rest of the season. I think that's just awesome. I think the Vikings have done a great job. They did a great job in the draft. Dallas Turner, he's not playing a ton of snaps, but I also don't think it matters that he's not playing a ton of snaps. They don't have to rely on him. They have really good players. And not having to rely on him, I think, is great. So I think that's awesome. I think Kwesi should be executive of the year with how he's kind of built this team. They have the number one defense in football, and they're starting 6 new guys. That rocks. That's incredible. Brian Flores arguably should be assistant coach of the year. We'll see if he ends up getting a head coaching interview or two. Like, things are just great with this Vikings team. And we're going to have a lot more conversations about what's going on with this Vikings team. We're going to have a lot more conversations about the trade deadline. But we wanted to kind of give you a sense of, hey, we're having conversations about Dexter Lawrence. We're having conversations about the trade deadline. And it's a bye week, so we can honestly talk about whatever the hell we want. And I think that's pretty cool. And I want to thank all 340 of you that are in the room right now. This is for an episode of The Real Forno Show. This is a record, I believe. We have had more for our draft shows, but just on a standalone The Real Forno Show, this is, or any show that we've done, this is a record. So thank you very much. We greatly appreciate everybody stopping by. And we're going to have a lot more for you tomorrow or Friday. I can't remember. We're going to have Scolders and Spice with Sal. This weekend on Saturday, we're going to have 2 old bloggers. And we're going to have even more next week. No show on Sunday. Sunday, enjoy a stress-free day of football. You're going to have an 8:30 a.m. game, Jacksonville and Chicago. You're going to have noon in the Minnesota market. You're going to get Washington and Baltimore and Arizona and Green Bay. And then at 3 o'clock, you're going to get Detroit and Dallas. The night game, you're going to get the Bengals and Giants. Well, maybe, you know what? Watch Big Brother on Sunday night because, yeah, that game kind of sounds poopy, especially if Malik Neighbors doesn't play because he's still healing from a concussion. But there's going to be a lot of great college football on Saturday, too. My Florida Gators hopefully, whip some Tennessee Volunteer butt. I hate that gaudy orange. You have Red River rivalry. You have LSU Ole Miss. You have Oregon, Ohio State. All 3 of those, or 2 of those final games, Oregon, Ohio State, and LSU Ole Miss are going to be going up against Florida, Tennessee. What a slate at 6 o'clock. That 6 o'clock is just murderer's row for potentially great football. Enjoy it. I will be up looking at fall colors. I'm going to find out what that's all about this weekend. I've never done it. I'm going to be unplugging for the weekend. Oh, I have an iPhone. I don't need a camera. That's the best part about technology these days, baby. It rocks. Thank you guys very much for joining. Make sure you like, subscribe, ring the bell so you know when to go live. And please, when this stream is done, leave a comment. Help us with the algorithm. It's free. You can become a member if you want and give us a little cash every month, which is really cool. But those things are free. And I think that'd be awesome. Also, go subscribe to the podcast feed. Leave us 5-star review. Leave us a comment. Help us continue to grow. Those are all free things. And we greatly appreciate each and every one of you. Until next time, I'm Tyler. He's Dave. SKOL Vikings.
SKOL Vikings. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love, our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching The Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone!